Blight by Orpheus Kidwell, Chapter 3. It had been a week since Naruto had talked with Aspen. It had been about a week since he had discussed the beacon with the other whites. While he was disappointed not all of them agreed to it, he hadn't really thought he would be able to. As it stood, he had somehow gotten Yujito to agree, but Fu and Gaara disagreed the idea for different reasons, seeing as how Fu disagreed, Emerald also decided to not do it. Still, he was sure that Jujito had and himself would have fun learning to become huntsmen. Fu had insisted that there was no way she could take on a job where she had been helping humanity indiscriminately. She'd continue to kill Grimm as she met them, but only because it would help her become stronger, help her stay strong enough to help the whites. With that in mind, Emerald stated that traveling with Fu would be better training than staying at a school all day. The two of them had left about 3 days ago. They had at least waited for Ospen to supply everyone with their own scrolls, though. It was nice having a way to contact his family. Gaara had stated that he couldn't possibly join unless he was certain that Temari and Kankuro were safe and sound, with relative certainty that he could find his siblings. He also left, along with Emerald and Fu. He checked in every day to let Naruto know they were still safe. He knew they were more than strong enough to handle themselves, but he appreciated the calm. It made him feel, what's it, something like security, safety, comfort? He wasn't sure. It was probably something like that. Utakata was still in the capital with Naruto and Yujito, but it wasn't because he wanted to have anything to do with huntsmen. He was just tired of fighting, of using his powers. He wanted to just settle in and do something that didn't involve violence. Naruto was happy with his family, wasn't splitting up any further, even if Utakata wasn't going to join him in a huntsman lifestyle. Thus, Naruto found himself traveling around the city without a care in the world. He noted the looks some people gave him, but it didn't stress him. He was simply glad they thought he was just a normal faunus. If they were busy noting his whiskers, they'd spend less time noticing his grim attributes. While his nether was concealed rather well, he knew that a skilled sensor could detect it without any issue. If people were distracted by one thing to hate him for, they wouldn't go searching for more stuff. After all, even with the looks, he wasn't worried about anything. Everyone he'd crossed paths with while in the capital city, aside from Ospen, that is, was so far away from him in terms of power that he didn't see any reason to, though. There was no reason to alter himself for people who were such non threats. Tossing those thoughts away, the blonde smiled as he found the shop he was looking for, from dusk till dawn. As he entered it, he couldn't help but look around with a grin. This shop was one of the best in town, according to Ospen. It had both unrefined crystals and purified ground down dust powder. There was so much he needed to buy, not just here either, from various places around Vacchio, from Vale. Ospen had been nice enough to put them up in a 3 bedroom apartment in the middle class area of the city. Had paid the rent for 3 months. He warned them that they should probably find a source of money by the time that ran out, though. He also had left them with an amount of lien for food and other expenses until they did find something. Given Utakata already wanted something non-violent, he'd been looking around. He currently had 2 part-time jobs. He worked as a shopkeep's assistant for some place called Tuscan's Book Trade, as well as working as a cook at a joint called Crowbar. It amazed Naruto how quickly he found the 2 different jobs, but Utakata simply said he had a nose for these things. He worked no less than four part-time jobs before he got kidnapped. Even if the job changed quite often. For now, Naruto just wanted to get some dust for Yujito and himself. They both needed some, as the complex didn't think they should have access to anything but a minimal supply of the stuff. It was probably a good idea, even if it didn't save them. As Naruto opened the door, he could hear a soft ring of the bell signaling his arrival. Walking in, he was greeted with something he didn't quite expect. The shopkeeper looked pretty old. His face was extremely wrinkled, and he couldn't even see the man's eyes. He wore an apron over everything and smiled at the boy, greeting him with a wave. That wasn't what surprised him, though. There was a girl in here who had been browsing through various things behind the glass when he entered. She looked up to see who came in as they made eye contact. Ruby? Naruto? In an instant, they both grinned and walked towards one another. What are you doing here? Well, I mean, obviously you're here to get dust. That was a dumb question. I mean, why are you in Vale? Wait, you're going to meet Ospin, so obviously you'd be in Vale. I guess what I meant is seeing the rambling girl try and find something. Naruto couldn't help but ponder. She's really awkward with this kind of stuff, isn't she? It's like she's an entirely different person when she's not fighting. Ignoring those thoughts, Naruto held up a hand. This quieted Ruby momentarily. I'm living in the capital now. Ospin invited my sister Yujito and I to study at Beacon in the fall semester, and so we've got an apartment until that time comes. Ruby widened her eyes at that statement. You got accepted to Beacon? That's amazing! Naruto smiled at her excitement for him. She was really different from all the other humans he'd ever met. Well, aside from Fu and Garth. He actually invited the rest of my family as well, but they declined. Utakata is still here in the capital, but he just wants a quiet life, so he's working at a shop. Fu and Emerald left with Gaara to go find his siblings and fight Strong Grim along the way. So it's just Yujito and me going in the autumn. Ruby heard the tone Naruto used and couldn't help but think it sounded lonely. Hey, why don't I show you around? I don't live in Vale, I live on Patch. That said, I'm over here so often I know all the best shops for anything you might want. So how about it? Naruto smiled and nodded as Ruby dragged him over to the counter to look at Dust. The red-hooded huntress in training smiled at that. That's better. He looks so sad. I suppose I'll hate it when Yang goes off to Beacon next year and leaves me behind, so I guess that's similar to what he's feeling. Naruto just needs a friend, and I'll keep his mind off the loneliness. A true huntress helps everyone in their time of need, even if it's not related to the Grim. 3 hours later, Naruto felt content. He wasn't sure that was the word he'd use to describe the sensation. He wasn't stressed out, itching for battle, or angry. He wasn't thinking about the best way to screw the complex over. In fact, he wasn't sure that he was thinking about anything in general. The ninth White couldn't remember the last time, if ever, he felt content to just exist. Was this how normal people felt on a daily basis as they did their errands, prepared meals, worked their jobs, and spent time with their families? It was different than what he knew, but not necessarily in a bad way. Ruby had helped him pick out some dust to match both Yujito's and his style. Yujito could receive a supply of fire and lightning dust while he would get gravity, wind, and ice. To be honest, Naruto had never used gravity dust before. It sounded like it could be fun. After they had left that store, Ruby began taking him around the market district. They visited the best defense and armor shop next. While there, she had explained that she got all her clothing here. They had a special type of material you could give to a tailor to make your clothing. Any clothing made from it was not only extremely durable, but it was resistant to dust and armor-based attacks. Of course, they also had actual armor as well, but the added weight would throw off her style, so Ruby didn't use them. Her semblance and fighting style required very precise measurements to be used efficiently, and she didn't want to have to relearn them. Naruto decided to browse for a bit at the store. In the end, he picked out a new trench coat made of the fabric she told him of, a few pair of boots, as well as put in an order for a few armored pieces. He didn't want to splurge his third of the funds so quickly, so it was best to put off getting them right now. He knew what he wanted to get when he got somewhere Leon, though. Their third stop was a familiar one. Tuscan's book trade was apparently one of the places that Ruby frequented. She enjoyed fantasy stories about heroes, monsters, and princesses and wanted to get Naruto into reading. In the end, he appeased her by using a copy of Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, The Tale of the Gutsy Shinobi, and a compilation of novice level dust spells with various elements so he could learn from it later. He had never been able to learn any magic at the complex, and it had always interested him. Where he also reintroduced Ruby to Utakata, who was on shift at the time, given they didn't interact at all the last time he was with Ruby. Finally, the stopped before their current position. He had been a supply shop for huntsmen and soldiers of the Valiant armored forces. The two of them mostly browsed around for anything they might want. Naruto was actually surprised to find that Vale, Grim Hunting Supply, and suppliers had things he didn't even understand the purpose of until Ruby explained it. There were salves and poisons, ammunition and whetstones, oils and medicine, chemicals and grenades, and other manner of things that he wasn't able to properly memorize all of it. In the end, he left empty-handed, but he would make sure to come back later for a few things he had some interest in learning how to use. Ruby ended up taking a few whetstones to replenish her depleting stock and some clips of ammunition for Crescent Rose. After they had realized it was getting late, and they went somewhere to get some food. That was how they ended up at the Muffin Man, a bakery that Ruby ensured was the best in all of Vale. She ordered several things and then showed Naruto to a table while they waited for their snacks. "So, how you enjoying Vale so far?" Ruby wondered after they sat down. The blonde thought about it and smiled. "I actually think it's pretty great," he admitted. "It's so much bigger than anywhere else I've been, but that's not saying much. Still, I definitely think I'm having fun today." Ruby smiled back, glad she was helping him. "Where were you before Uncle Crow brought you to Vale, anyways?" Ruby couldn't help but wonder. Naruto pondered on how to answer it, but came to a rather sobering conclusion. He should tell her now what he was before they became friends, otherwise she'd just be in danger or feel betrayed later down the line. After all his missions, he knew the value of putting your trust in others and how necessary it was to be upfront with people you wanted to trust you. As he had figured out what he was going to say, someone came by and dropped some cookies and milk off at their table. The plate looked more than big enough for both of them. Ruby immediately took one and savored its flavor as the blonde spoke. "Well, truth be told, I don't remember where I'm originally from, except that it was somewhere in the kingdom of Mistral before I met Crow. I lived somewhere near the border of Vale and Vacuole, though, in a place I called the Complex." Ruby was about to grab a second cookie when she heard what Naruto was saying and kept her hunger in check. What he was saying sounded like it could be the start of a really good story. "Mistral is really far away from the border. How did you end up there? Actually, why were you there? Naruto thought about what she asked and smiled a bit sadly as he took one of the cookies and tasted a bit of it. These were actually pretty good. She was right. What I was doing there and why I ended up there are questions I still don't have answers to. If you listen, I can tell you what happened since I got to the complex 8 years ago, though. I already told it to Amber, Crow, and Ospen, but I think telling it one more time couldn't hurt. Ruby couldn't help but feel excited that she was going to hear something that interested her Uncle Crow and Headmaster Ospen. Was this the thing that made Ospen decide to let Naruto in early? To let Ospen in early? I'd love to hear your story. Her innocence was palpable to someone like Naruto, and he could only smile. He had decided he wanted to protect that from people like those at the complex. It all began 8 years ago when an orphan from a city outside Mistro's capital city woke up in a cell surrounded by dozens of strangers, Naruto began. After they calmed him down, these strangers explained to the boy where he was, or where they thought they were. They called it the complex. It was a military style institution that performed biological experiments in order to create the perfect weapon, a hybrid capable of using both aura and nether. That was their goal, and they were the subjects, the payment for attaining it. The blonde watched as Ruby slowly realized what he was saying. She was still captivated, but her anticipation took on a different hue. He couldn't quite place it, but at least she didn't do anything drastic yet. On the very first day, some of those strangers were taken away and more strangers arrived. Every time the cell, one of hundreds, was opened, the augments were subjected to a form of knockout gas to ensure they didn't try anything. Day in and day out, people were chosen for tests and none of them ever returned. Only after 2 years of becoming attached to those strangers and subsequently losing them did the boy find it was his turn to become a test. At that time, he was grateful his time had come. All the waiting, the constant meeting and losing of friends, and the anxiety had finally got to him. He went in fully prepared and content with the thought of death. However, the complex wouldn't allow him even that. The test he was put through turned out to be a success. What do you mean success? Ruby wondered, and she didn't want to interrupt him, but it just came out. She couldn't help it. Naruto smiled at the question and took a bite of his cookie, humming and thought, Naruto? Just as I told you, the complex sought to create biological weapons. While they define their successes very rigidly, I'll explain everything they created to the best of my knowledge. The experiments could be divided into several categories. You had the whites, the spectre, the revenant, the drugger, and the whites. The drugger are by far the largest group of experiments because this is the category used for every subject they deemed a failure. They were formed by having far too much nether injected into them to the degree they lost their sapience. You can't even properly call them anything but beasts at this point. They aren't human or faunus, but they're not grim either. Grim with aura and semblance, grim with souls. Then there's the first group of successes. The specters are humans who were given just enough nether to cause noticeable changes, but not enough to turn them into Draugr. They grow stronger around negative emotions, can sense them, have some ability with nether manipulation, and are able to grow and retract bone armor in addition to whatever semblance they have. These were the experiments who had very strong souls and large aura reserves. The rates were much different. Out of every 100 would be a Draugr, a Wraith is born. This is the rare occurrence where their nether pool and aura reserve streamline into a single energy source. You might think of them as having an anti-soul. They're more grim than human or faunus, but with all the cunning and intelligence of their previous self. They don't have the ability to use bone armor, but they have the large affinity to neither manipulate and reveal the negative emotions of others, actually able to sustain and heal themselves using it. Lastly, you have the Remnants. The nether pool manifested in a strange way. Instead of affecting them, their aura counterbalanced it and keeps all of the nether outside of themselves. It causes Grimm to be attracted to them. At the same time, they're capable of commanding Grimm like soldiers in an army, more precisely, like bees in a hive. I thought you said there was a group called the Whites. Ruby asked. Her quick response told him how intently she was listening to him. The fact that she was so enraptured implied many things. Thankfully, she didn't know any sign of hating him. She didn't show any sign of hating him. Yes, that's my group, my family. I'm their leader. The nine of us were the answer to the problems Draugr possessed. If there was only more aura, then the nether could be increased. If both of them were cranked up, then wouldn't the result be far stronger than the specter? The short answer is yes. Yes, we are. By altering our genetics to be both human and faunus, and then injecting us with the aura of the Draugr, they were able to push our nether reserves far higher than they imagined. But Naruto, you don't seem like a Grim. You don't even feel like one. You're kind of warm. I mean, your aura. Your aura has this warm feeling like a campfire. Ruby quickly corrected herself with a light dusting of red on her pale cheeks. The blonde smiled at how awkward the girl was, but nodded. I'm restraining my nether down to a level where most people can't detect it. I dare say even Ospen and Crow weren't capable of feeling it. I can't exactly hide my aura at the same time, though. It's one or the other with me. I suppose that's not really the point, though. How about the first thing you said? Though I'm not a Grim, I'm not a human, I'm not Faunus, I'm a White. I'm so far apart from anything that exists that I'm not sure if anyone would accept me. If you don't want to be friends, then I get it. I'm still going to become a huntsman, though. If I can be a thorn in the complex side, then I think I can be happy. Ruby had an expression on her face that was hard to read, but it was generally negative. When she finally spoke, Naruto was ready for the inevitable. It never came. Why? He looked at her as she asked that. Why would you think I'd stop being your friend over something you didn't do? You don't agree with what they did and you want to help others with what came at the sacrifice of others. You didn't even ask them to sacrifice themselves for you. You aren't a monster. I think that makes for the hero of a really good story that people will tell for a long time. Naruto didn't understand why what Ruby said made him feel more that contentment, but it did. Why did the air suddenly taste like salt? Why did his face feel so warm? Don't cry, Naru. I wasn't trying to upset you. Oh, that's why. Wiping away the tears, the blonde grinned. It's alright. That's never happened before. I mean, I've cried before. I'm more meant crying for something other than pain. He noted that they didn't really stop even when he noticed it. Focusing on holding them back, he finally was able to get it to a point that he was happy with. Sorry, I don't know why that happened. Ruby just smiled, looking at him. Pushing his emotions down, the boy wiped his eyes one last time before matching her smile. Where was I? Oh, I don't even remember. What's this? Are you on a date, little sis? Immediately, the hooded girl lit up like some sort of tomato as she heard the voice and noticed the situation. I came to look for you and figured you'd be here, but you're with a boy on top of that. Oh, cookies and milk? I didn't know you were that serious. I'm Yang, Ruby's big sister. Who might you be? The girl he looked at seemed so far away from Ruby that it was difficult to to think she was telling the truth. She was tall, with violet eyes and long sun golden hair down her back, a cowlick sticking up at the top. She wore a brown jacket that exposed her midriff over a yellow crop top, a pair of golden bracelets over black fingerless gloves, and an orange scarf around her neck. In addition, she wore a pair of black mini shorts with a brown belt and a pleated piece of material hanging off of its side, a pair of brown knee-high boots with orange over-the-knee socks, the right one pushed to below the knee. Around her left leg below the knee, a piece of purple cloth was tied around her leg. From her boisterous attitude and confidence smirk, he highly doubted she had any of Ruby's awkwardness. My name's Naruto. I didn't know this was a date. Is that what usually consists as one? I thought that she was just showing me around town and we were getting something to eat. Yang grew even wider as he spoke somehow. You're even more innocent than Ruby. Oh, that's too adorable. I like him, sis. He's definitely a keeper. Naruto tilted his head in confusion, genuinely not understanding what she was talking about. The action only seemed to make the older girl squeal and clap her hands once. Be careful, Ruby, or someone might take your new boyfriend away. Looking over Naruto once more, she smirked. Oh, he's like a little puppy, lost and alone. A fox, actually, he responded to the fellow blonde. Even better. The ninth White did not understand how two sisters could be so different. Then again, his only reference was Emerald and Fu. He couldn't really imagine that they were the picture of normalcy in any standard. So how'd you two meet? Given Ruby seemed to have entered some sort of embarrassment coma by having her sister arrive and make all of these insinuations and accusations, he answered, I was passing through the kingdom with Ruby's Uncle Crow on my way to meet Headmaster Ospen when I felt a large nether signature. I had been bugging Crow for several days to let me fight Grim, and he finally gave in. I found a large pack of beowulfs in a forest and began fighting them. When I noted that Ruby was also down there, I believe she was visiting her mother's gravestone and was on her way back. Normally, Naruto wouldn't be this forward, but it was something the complex had forced him into, a habit of nature. When in doubt about the party you're speaking to, be polite and cordial, follow all the formalities of the region you're in, and it'll be better for you. That is exactly like Ruby. Yang lost all of her teasing atmosphere and chuckled. She met you while fighting Grim and then showed you around town. Still, I'm glad she's making friends and going on a date. It's not a date, Yang. Ruby finally found her voice by explaining that. Then she looked at her not date to see his reaction almost immediately. Yang grinned again, while Naruto just seemed as confused as ever. Ruby seemed to calm when the boy didn't take offense, but it only caused Yang to regain her previous aura. Whispering something to the girl, Yang caused her sister to light up once again. Naruto didn't hear what it was, but judging by his friend's reaction, there were a few guesses he might have. Looking from one to the other, Yang smirked. I'll let you two get back to your date. No more third wheel Yang to deal with. Have fun all alone, you two. Ruby was sadly steaming in a storm of her own thoughts while Naruto watched Yang leave. What a strange girl. Are Yang and Ruby really related? They don't seem similar at all. But Conqueror and Gara are very different too. Emerald and Fu are alike in most ways, though. Is the difference because one pair are brothers and the other are sisters? Or are Emerald and Fu the odd ones? I really do wonder sometimes. Naruto, the girl finally spoke up. The blonde met her silver eyes. Did you think this was a date? The question threw him off guard. Why would she ask that sort of thing? Was it a date? He wasn't sure. Still, it was probably something important to her. It felt like it could have been one. I had a lot of fun shopping around with you, and I really like the food. I've never had sweets before, and I see why you like them. I really enjoyed your company. He smiled to the girl who just became a deeper shade of red until she matched her namesake that said she had the largest smile on her face he'd ever seen. He didn't quite get it, but she seemed happy. That meant he did something good, right? End of chapter 3.